All right, we're here today doing a passenger profile with Jeffrey John LaPlante, who's a composer, producer, multi-instrumentalist out of Western Massachusetts. Jeff has been writing music for 30 plus years and has performed throughout New England with bands such as Entropy, great name, Devil Does Destiny, and the Brothers. You didn't have to work very hard on that name. In 2020, Jeff made the jump to production music for film and TV and has found success with libraries all over the world, with placements on networks like Netflix, Bravo, MTV, HGTV, and Peacock. When Jeff isn't composing music, he's teaching students how to read and write as an elementary school teacher. So, first question. Hi, Jeff. Welcome, by the way.
Hello, good to be here.
Thanks for doing this on a Saturday. I appreciate it. So, what's harder, doing production music or teaching 7-year-olds how to read, write, and you know, I was going to say read and write, but I don't know if you do math as well. But what's harder, teaching or
Um,
production music?
Being consistent with production music is definitely harder. I believe that I was born to teach. It just comes very natural to me. So I wake up in the morning, I'm excited to go to work, and the day is just smooth and it's a happy atmosphere in my classroom. I am listening to music constantly though throughout my school day. I'm most of the time listening to my own stuff, and I'm making little notes as I go. I will tell you this, there's no greater barometer than a bunch of kids' heads bobbing to your music or doing nothing to your music. So that's how I know if a cue is working.
I'm surprised you're not doing kids' music.
Well, I thought about that for a little bit, but I'm not much of a singer. And I think a lot of those little jingles, you have to be able to write lyrics and sing. So
So you're not going
But
to
go
do
back to your original question, what's harder? I wouldn't say writing production music is hard for me, but it is hard to stay consistent. Uh, so I'm doing about 200 to 300 tracks a year, and to be that consistent and maintain the quality is definitely challenging. Some days when you just don't feel like turning your DAW on, but you kind of have to force yourself to. So I would say writing music is harder than teaching for me.
So you've been through like three distinct periods with Taxi, and it sounds like the first two were kind of epic failures. The first one starting in 2007 and going through 2010. You did a lot of submissions, 264 submissions. So that's like, 70, no, 80 some submissions per year, which is, clearly more than one a week. And you said, looking back in this period, my heart was there, but my desire to succeed was in full force, but my music just wasn't good enough. I simply did not have the tools or the equipment. Didn't even have a DAW. I had a portable 16-track workstation that could master tracks to a CD. So I'd get the music from Taxi, um, from the CD onto my computer, and then submit it to Taxi's listings. Although I did everything I wasn't supposed to do, which is not an uncommon story, submitting pre-written songs to listings that kind of matched up, submitting way too many songs and hoping something would stick, repeatedly submitting the same material over and over, which I'm really glad you brought that up because it happens a lot, without ever considering that maybe the screeners were right and I just wasn't ready yet. Of course, these stats were a huge blow to my ego, so after 4 years, I gave up. I can't blame you, and frankly, hats off to you, no pun intended, but hats off to you for hanging in there, and you kept trying for 4 years. Um, what would you say to people that are committing that same so-called sin of repeating, submitting the same material over and over again when it was pre-recorded stuff, and you're hoping, well, maybe it'll fit? I see that as one of the bigger mistakes new members make. Any comment on that or thoughts or advice for fellow members?
Well, I think the main thing would be think of Taxi as a learning environment where you have to get an education from Taxi, similar to paying tuition at a college. The screeners, as well as the forum, is going to be a tremendous opportunity for you to learn what you need to know in order to be successful in this industry. Back in 2007, I did not have that mindset at all. I was of the mindset where I wanted to get discovered. Okay. We would have these pre written songs already recorded, all the tracks were ready to go, and we just needed somebody to discover that song and hand it off to Celine Dion or somebody like that. Okay. So when we started getting I was working with a co-writer at the time who was the singer. I wasn't doing instrumental. It was songs that we were trying to pitch to artists. So the critiques started coming in, and we would get offended and start disagreeing with certain things, all the while thinking that our stuff was so good and we just needed the right screener to hear it or the right supervisor to hear it, and then we were going to get a huge deal with a big artist and get our song on the radio and win a Grammy and all that. So it became the screener's fault, and we did not even try to learn from what they were saying. So we would stick with those songs on the album that we had just made and just keep on pitching them, thinking, oh, well, eventually we're going to get a forward and somebody is going to recognize our brilliance. Well, that never happened. And the main thing is that we weren't willing to make any of the changes that were suggested by the professionals. We were stuck in our own egos.
Wow, very big of you to admit that, because so many people make exactly that same mistake, and it breaks our heart and it frustrates us, and we beg and we plead, we cajole, please, create music that's on target for the listing rather than submitting what you've already got in the can, because the odds of all the stars lining up, which you now know is really important in this industry, that's just probably not going to happen. But I think it's really um, poignant that you talk about it. All it's going to take is that one person, and
Yeah,
everybody
because
shares that belief.
that's what we grew up hearing. Like the no name band is in a club, and an A&R person just happens to walk in and walks up to them at the end of the gig, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, this is your big break, you're so lucky that we were in the club that night and we're going to sign you. So that dream was still very much alive in my early to mid 20s. I was like, there's still a chance for that to happen. And in my mind, Taxi was it. So we would even submit things to listings that weren't a good fit at all, just because we knew an industry pro was going to be listening to our music. And even if it wasn't right for the listing, very naively we would think, oh well, an industry pro is going to hear the song, and even if it's not right for the listing, as soon as they hear the song, they're going to pass it off to the big record producer that's their friend. Or it was just very naive way of thinking. We did not understand the licensing industry at all. I wish I would have taken it more seriously and learned. I wasn't really on the forums that much. I wasn't asking the right questions. It was just a dream that I was trying to shove into what do you always say? The square
Square
peg
peg.
into a round. That's exactly what was happening. We just wanted somebody. We wanted the right person to hear our music, and we thought that as soon as it got into the right person's hands, then it would blow up. And obviously, that never happened.
Well, I'm really glad that you brought that up and that you were so eloquent in describing the naivete and the process of submitting at bad targets, because so many people do that. And of course, then they blame the screener, they blame Taxi, then they go online and they say, oh, yeah, they posted in a comment under a YouTube video, or they post on somebody else's forum or on social media. Yeah, I was a Taxi member for a couple of years, nothing happened for me. So it sounds like Taxi failed. And really, it was their approach. but we can't go around pointing fingers at every person that is naive and early on in the game and makes that mistake. So I'm glad you brought it up, and I hope 100,000 people see this segment.
Yeah, so one of the things I used to do, and I do not recommend this at all. I highly discourage this. But I had a taxi budget. Uh, so I was going to spend $100 on submissions every month. So that would be 20 submissions every month. So I would go through the listings and pick the 20 that I wanted to submit to.
Wow.
Not a good idea.
Wow, wow, wow. And then in 2013, you came back again uh, for another slap in the face. And you did 16 submissions. And you said, after writing better material with my band, I decided to give Taxi another chance. So I signed up, submitted our 4 best new songs to several listings. When the returns started coming in, it reminded me of the complete and utter failure my last go at Taxi was. So apart from that first batch of submissions, I ignored Taxi for the rest of the year and let my membership end. That's so heartbreaking to me because now we know you've got the talent, you've got the skills, you've got the work ethic. You are succeeding. You are at the beginning of, you're like a rocket that's 5 feet off the launch pad, and it's clear you're going to space. Um, and you
Yeah,
walk
back
away out of
I,
frustration.
I had the gear. I did not have I was not financially set enough to buy the equipment that I needed in order to make quality music. Also around that time, my kids were very young, so much of my time was spent raising my family. And I didn't have the time to put into it now. Well, knowing how much time it takes now, looking back, there's no way I would have been able to do it correctly back then anyway. Part of me regrets giving up so soon back in 2013, and it happened again in 2015. But I think I was still just traumatized by the first 4 years. That I was excited. I had some new music, and I knew it was better than my music was before. I signed up for Taxi that very night, submitted 16 tracks. Within the first month, the returns started coming, and it just reminded me of the previous 4 years. And I was like, I can't do this again. I can't spend $2,000 on submissions for the next 4 years. I cannot do that again. So I just decided to not even submit anymore.
And you never touched your 2015 membership again. And in your own words, you ignored Taxi for the next 5 years. And considering the circumstance, I can't blame you. And then, whoops. Okay, so then in 2020, you rejoined again. Um, I'd say if there was a good aspect to COVID, that was it. You had the time, as we all did. We were all homebound, and I actually think Taxi was such a great drug, if you will, for people that were homebound. It kept a lot of our members from going crazy. They had something forward moving and productive to do. So, what changed in 2020 when everything shut down and you were homebound? How did you approach Taxi differently? And did you finally have the right gear? And how long did it take you to learn to use that gear?
Well, throughout probably from 2015 to 2020, I did buy some pretty good gear, and I was teaching a lot of music as well. I taught private music lessons. Like after I would get home from school, I had several clients around my town, and I was getting better as a musician. There was a looming thought that I was a failure in music, and I never thought I would fail with music because throughout my childhood, everyone would always tell me that I had such a natural gift and a natural talent. So I was asking myself, why, if I have this gift, have I been such a failure with this? And it made me feel bad. Like up until the story right now, well, everything that you just read is such a devastating story. It's so sad. And I did not want the story to end that way.
I'm
So
glad it didn't.
no, no. So in 2020, when everything shut down, I wasn't able to teach my music lessons anymore. So I needed an outlet for that part of me, and it's always been a huge part of me. So I decided right then and there that I'm going to give it one more go. I'm going to give it one more shot. So I wrote a piece of music. I wouldn't even call them cues right away because I still at that point did not know what a cue was because I never had the wherewithal to learn. I thought I knew everything. Just I've been writing songs since I was 10 years old. I was the child prodigy.
Wow.
In my town, everybody was like, "Oh my God, what other fifth grader is writing songs?" So I always thought that I just had this musical gift and that I was special, right? But it didn't pan out. It and until I finally made the decision in 2020, let's do it the right way. I had some better gear. Uh, I had the time because of COVID, I was now able to do a piece of music every single day, and I think I did about a hundred pieces of music in 3 or 4 months before I had to go back to school again.
Wow, that's a great work ethic.
And I learned a tremendous amount by doing those pieces. Uh, I also rejoined Taxi because I wanted to put the music that I was making out there. And I was doing instrumental music, and not many of my friends and family are interested in hearing instrumental music. So I needed somewhere to put them, and I wanted some validation because I thought the stuff was really good.
Um, so how did you ultimately learn, for those who don't know that may be watching this, the difference between an instrumental, which some people just mute the vocal track on a song, and that is kind of an instrumental, but then it's more like a rhythm track without a lead melody. The difference between that and an instrumental cue, which is kind of the lifeblood, certainly of reality TV and many other types of television as well. Cues have a different structure to them. They're actually much simpler, but require good planning, I would say. Um, how did you learn that difference?
Well, it was a mindset shift. I finally had the mindset that when I rejoined Taxi, it was going to become an educational experience. So I went on YouTube and watched all of the Taxi TVs. I went on the forums and searched questions. I started listening to a lot more music uh, while watching television. Everything that I should have been doing all along. It's the stuff that you talk about, and I finally listened to you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I wish every member would. Frankly, that's much of the motivation for doing these passenger profiles. We beg people to take the advice because we literally hand them a roadmap and a toolkit on a silver platter. Those who figure it out and do it find that they can be successful. Those who don't walk away very frustrated, and most of the time they blame Taxi. You mentioned that you read Steve Barden's books or book and Dean Crapane's books as well. I am a huge fan of both of those guys. Are friends of mine, and I love them as people. But I'm so blown away by the quality of information that they provide in their books. When you started reading those books, did you like light up and go, ah? Was it like a choir of angels going, ah? When you realize, oh, this is it.
Yeah, I think I discovered Steve Barden's book when I was watching one of the YouTube videos and you had talked about it. So I bought it right away. I read it in maybe a few days. I just soaked it right in because I was so determined to succeed finally. And I actually messaged Steve on SoundCloud, telling him how important it was, and how great the information was. And he responded, and he said, "I really appreciate your kind words." I was able to send him a couple pieces of music, and he gave me some thoughts on those, mostly good, and it was like a really really good sense of accomplishment that the person's book that I had just read thought that my music had potential. So, Steve Barden, if you're watching, you are a huge part of this newfound success, and that was right at the beginning. After that, I got Dean's books. Dean is such a fabulous writer. I read his Demystifying the Q book in one day. I could not put it down. It's so good. He's almost like a comedian as well. It was knowledgeable and very funny little stories interjected in that book. So that is highly recommended as well.
Yeah, if you want to go into the business of making instrumental cues for film and television, if you don't read Steve Barden's book, and Steve actually has a second book, which is at a higher level, that actually uses charts to show how he does what he does, which is great for people who are classic or not classically trained, but trained musicians who understand theory a lot and can read music. Get that book as well. And Dean Krippane's books, like you said, are you feel like you're hanging out with your buddy. And he's like, dude, try this. And by the way, I made chili last night and it was really good. I think there's food stuff thrown in there
Yeah.
adds a lot of his personality and heart. And you really get a sense that this guy is really trying to help me. He's not trying to sell books. He just knows how easy it can be if you do it the right way. And he's sharing that knowledge. Which, by the way, let's talk about your fellow taxi members and their generosity. Have you been to an in-person road rally yet? Did you go to the one last year?
No, we kind of really take the COVID stuff seriously in my family because we have some health issues. So I would have gone in 2020, but that's when, of course, that's when COVID was first happened, and then since then we don't even go to restaurants indoors. So we have to take it pretty seriously. Hopefully, at one point, I will be able to go to in person, but the virtual ones are very very helpful. So I could go and watch all of them after the fact.
Well, consider coming this year. Last year, we did not have one reported case of COVID. And frankly, I prepared because I take COVID seriously. Anybody should. Although now it seems like, you hardly ever hear about it anymore. And thank God, it's mostly a dead issue. Um, but I would say that I probably purchased multiple gallons of disinfectant, thousands upon thousands of hand wipes, 5,000 masks, and nobody used any of it last year. I would say maybe I saw 100 people walking around with masks during the course of the entire weekend. And of course, we had close to somewhere around a couple thousand people there and not one reported case. So I was happy about that. But I hope you come sooner than later because that's the other piece of the puzzle that you will find that will take you to a whole other level, which is meeting Steve Barden, Dean Krippane, all your fellow members that you've become friends with, Matt Vanderbilt. All these guys are super accessible, really, really friendly, very generous with their time and their knowledge. More than anything, you'll meet collaborators. And I know you've got some already, but it's just like 5X's or 10X's the whole taxi experience. So try and come. I will give you gallons of sanitizer and more than enough masks to get you through 3.5 days. Um, let's see. Moving on
But
here. Oh,
other people that I've met through Taxi have become really good friends of mine, and that was originally through the Taxi forums. I think that that's the best thing about the forums for me is meeting like-minded people. And I was introduced to Dave Croft, who's become a mentor of mine. And that was through the forums. Somebody had a link to one of his podcasts, and that has been an extremely valuable friendship. Chris Mosier, who is very active on the forums, and is one of the most talented composers I've ever heard. He uh, he and I were giving each other, suggestions and sharing our cues together. And we were kind of on the same journey at first when we were both doing pop cues. We
Right.
would be some of the only people that got forwards on the pop cues. So we would always, message each other through the forum, say, "Oh, it happened again. It was just you and me," and that's become a good friendship. Um, when I discovered the Forwards blog, that was a huge thing for me because I got to see the other people that were being successful with the same kind of music as I was, like someone like Greg Carosa, who now and you can find all these people after you become friends with them through the forums. They're all on Facebook and Instagram, and then you can kind of like see each other's families and you become friends. So the taxi forum's a great resource, not just for knowledge, but for meeting really, really cool people.
Yeah, the community aspect of taxi, frankly, is something that I didn't even write into the business plan 32 years ago. I could see it in the very early days of taxi when we had maybe 100 members, that there were a few that were starting to connect with each other, either starting local groups in Peoria, Illinois, or Los Angeles, or wherever. But the level, the size of the community that it is now, the community is very famous for its spirit of generosity. There's not a lot of like, crotch grabbing, leather pants wearing rock guys going, "Ew, you call that a song?" None of that attitude. It's all like, dude, you're so close. Let me show you one other little trick you can do that will push you over the line. They're essentially created competitors for themselves, but they don't care because rising water floats all boats, I think is kind of the spirit of it all. Um, you mentioned that a library you got forwarded to wanted to sign a couple of cues, and then they turned those two cues turned it to them requesting two full albums of material from you in 2021. How did that feel when they not only said, "Yeah, we like these, we'd like to sign them. Can you do a couple of full albums for us?" Did you like fall out of your chair?
Yeah, the first time a library guy had called me, I couldn't believe it. I was like, okay, well, finally, I'm doing it right, and it kind of forgave all those years of taxi failure, you know. Right then and there, I was like, oh, okay, well, all those times I thought taxi was a scam. It wasn't. It was just me. It really works. A library owner just called me and wants to sign my stuff, and I was over the moon. And I'm so thankful. The library owner is a friend of yours. You know who I'm talking about, and I am forever, forever grateful.
Yeah, I mean, most of those library owners have become friends of mine because I respect their business ethic, or we wouldn't be working with them. And when you respect somebody, it's very easy to become friends with them. Are you talking person whose first name starts with the letter C?
Yes.
Yeah, he's become a very close friend of mine, and I found him playing piano at a Nordstrom under an escalator. And that's how he earned his living, maybe teaching some lessons at the time, doing some, maybe playing casuals at weddings, whatever he could do to put food on the table. And now, he's a successful composer and a very successful, very ethical, very active and hardworking library owner. And I couldn't be happier to count him among my friends. So after those two albums, things really started to perk up for you. And you mentioned that you had almost 400 cues signed um, at that point, and currently, and you're shooting for 500, I believe, by the end of this year.
Yeah.
Um, that is tremendous productivity. Uh, how do you find the time? Because your kids aren't out of the house yet. They're not like college age kids, are they?
No, there's going to be 16 and 13 in a few months. So I mean, they're doing their own thing. They hang out with their friends and spend a lot of time on their phones,
Big,
So,
no
so
surprise
it
there.
gives me some extra time where I'm not necessarily like actively parenting, But I wake up early in the morning. I I get home from my day job and now I'm writing music. I've whittled down my clientele for music lessons when I started making some money with sync, because I couldn't do both. So as my sync income increases and my royalties start going up, I could then decrease my clients for lessons, because that took up a lot of my time.
Yeah.
So now I get home from work and I spend a couple hours doing music. And my big day for production is Sunday. I pretty much spend all of Sunday writing music. That's my whole family knows Sunday is my music day.
So as long
So
as you keep buying new
I
iPhones for your family members, they'll leave you alone.
yeah, they pretty much leave me alone because they know. And my studio is right in my living room too, so I don't have like
Wow.
a yeah. I,
How do you
I,
pull that off? How do you get the rest of the family to stay out of the living room? That's a big ask.
yeah, I mean it's a pretty big space. We have a like a television family room and another space of the house as well. So it's not the only space for relaxation. Um, but yeah, it's like a really important part of who I am. So I wanted it right in my space. I didn't want to have to disappear or sneak away to like a room above the garage, because then I would feel like I was not there for my family. I want it to be right out in the open where if somebody needs me, I can just press stop and attend to them. That's just what works for me. I know some composers cannot work that way with distractions, but it would be very, very hard for me to be isolated for as many hours as I am, because I would feel guilty that I was not there for my family.
Well, you're a good husband and a good father for feeling that way. Congratulations for accomplishing that goal. Because, yeah, you're right. A lot of people, if I were a composer, I would need complete isolation. Back when I still worked in a studio, I wouldn't even let roadies in my control room because just I can't handle people behind me talking about, I don't like what the bass player's doing. It's like, leave me alone. Let's make a record, stay focused. So good on you. You mentioned that album deal that had 20 cues on it brought in about $4,000. How did that feel the first time you got a sizable check? Was it
Yeah,
like,
that was earlier this year, and that was through a different company that came from a taxi forward. That was huge for me, because then I can say that all the money that I thought I had squandered through taxi and back in 2000, for that one deal made up for all of that. So of course, when it came time for me to renew, I did the numbers. I was like, well, I've made more because of taxi than I've spent on taxi. So yes, of course, let's give it another year and see what happens. See if that happens again.
well, I'm glad you did. And then you mentioned in May of 2023, just a couple months ago, a library signed through a taxi forward one of your cues, and it ended up on a Netflix show called Jewish Matchmaker, and it came with a nice sync fee of $600. I didn't even know that show existed. I'm Jewish, so I'm gonna have to watch it, but I am married, so I don't really need a matchmaker.
Yeah, so it's interesting because that is definitely a show that I would have watched anyway. It's a spin-off of Indian Matchmaker, which was a huge hit for Netflix the past couple of years. So they did the Jewish Matchmaker, which is, you know, uh, myself and my girlfriend would have watched that show anyway, you
Wow.
know, because those are the shows we love to watch. Like we like to watch all of the dating shows like Love is Blind and The Bachelor and Married at First Sight and the matchmaking shows. We really enjoy the human behavior and see how people react in like romantic situations. My girlfriend's a social worker, so it's something that we just enjoy together. And it was awesome to hear my music on a show that I would have watched anyway.
How did that feel? The first time you heard your music in a TV show, did the hair on your arm stand up? Did you get teary-eyed? Did you like order a giant pizza and crack open a 40-ounce beer? How'd you celebrate that?
Yeah, well, it wasn't my first placement. My first placement I had found out via TuneSat, which is a website that you can see where your stuff is. But my first placement was with that Nordstrom's library, actually. Um, and it was another dating show, but it was a German dating show, and I couldn't find it. I tried to find it so I can watch it, but couldn't really tell what was going on because I don't speak German. But I was able to see like little snippets of my first placement, which was really cool to see. Fast forward to the Jewish Matchmaker show. I actually was a little bit disappointed because I didn't think it was mixed well. I thought it was way too loud in the show. So I was like, oh, why did they do it that way?
You realize, of course, you're the first guy that ever thought their music was too loud in a show.
Uh,
Usually, what we hear is, "I could barely hear it, but the check still cleared."
yeah, I had already gotten paid for it because I don't think Netflix pays much in the back end at all. So I guess the sync fees are going to be pretty good. So, uh, and again, that was through a library that I had connected through Taxi. Taxi has been the reason for a lot of my recent success, and hopefully that's the wave of the future.